Hey everybody, welcome to another Pickleball Physio podcast episode. Here we talk about pickleball injury prevention and recovery and other general health and wellness considerations to keep us on the courts, getting back sooner after an injury, staying on longer, and just playing more games. We love our sport and we want to just keep playing. And I have another special guest today, Brien Lee. He is a fellow physical therapist and a certified strength and conditioning specialist, specializing in orthopedics and sports medicine. Brien and I actually connected a couple of months ago through a program where we are just wanting to help bring more knowledge and education to the general public about the things that we know and love. And he and I actually got to meet each other at the beginning of June at a live event where a bunch of us healthcare providers got together and networked together, and we got to play pickleball a couple times. So it was really, really fun. I'm really excited to have Brien on with me today. Welcome, Brien.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah, for having me on. I always enjoy our conversations, and it's always nice chatting with somebody who has, very similar passions with helping people and helping pickleball players to play better. And I really enjoyed also just getting to meet you in person and playing a little bit of pickleball together too.
Yeah, Brien actually was so gracious and had me on his podcast, The Healthy Pickleballer, and we had another opportunity to chat together. So after listening to this episode, please go check out his podcast and that episode and his many other episodes as well over there. Because yeah, there's just so many of us who love this sport, and more physical therapists are starting to see the value and in the knowledge we have in connecting it to the pickleball community. And so I'm super excited to have a fellow PT, fellow pickleballer in this world with me, that we get to get excited about the sport and about our profession and keep people happy and healthy. So Brien, can you give our listeners and our viewers a little bit more of a background of how you came into the world of pickleball? Because you didn't initially start in pickleball when you were thinking of going into physical therapy, or when you started practicing for that matter.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite questions to ask people, especially just because the game is relatively new, but it's exploded onto the scene, and just kind of hearing, all the different worlds that people have come from and how they've transitioned into the pickleball world. So yeah, I'm a physical therapist and a strength and conditioning specialist. And for a couple of years into my career, I was actually a PT that traveled on tour with Broadway shows across the country, and did that for several years. Really fell in love with working with people that are really kind of performing at the highest level. And we focused just a lot on movement patterns and injury prevention programs. And so if there's a sport or so for a couple of years, I was actually a physical therapist for Broadway shows on their national tours. And that was kind of an opportunity as well that I didn't necessarily see myself kind of getting into. When I initially thought about physical therapy, I was much more focused kind of on sports medicine, working with, baseball players, tennis players. But I really saw an opportunity there to really just be able to work with elite level performers. Saw it kind of as a challenge, but also as really an opportunity to do something that I, always wanted to do. And so I did that for a couple of years. And then, I actually was affected by COVID back in 2020. I was on tour with the production then, and that industry got hit pretty hard. It just kind of, and it just kind of caused a little bit of a shift in gears. Kind of right around that time is when pickleball really kind of came onto the scene for a lot of people. Yeah, so I kind of got exposed to pickleball just as the game was growing, and being a physical therapist, it was kind of inevitable that I think you're going to start seeing clients that kind of come in for pickleball related injuries, as any PT kind of should do when you start working with the clients that are doing a certain activity. Kind of led me to studying the game a little bit more, and kind of by watching the game and learning more about it, my interest started to grow more and more. Also wanted to figure out why people couldn't, stay away from the court. There's got to be something about this game that keeps it coming back.
Right.
And So eventually went out onto the court with some clients who wanted me to experience it, and just kind of fell in love from that time on.
That's awesome. It's so interesting just how many different walks of life people come from and then end up in pickleball. And it's really exciting because, there's just so many wonderful, amazing people that we get to encounter and get to know and interact with through the sport. But I love that, you're able to bring the knowledge that you had from your time working with Broadway national tours and stuff. Can you share a little bit more how your experience as a PT on Broadway helps you when you're working with your pickleball players now?
Yeah, and I think it really is kind of comes down to like the approach that I take as the PT for Broadway shows. That model is really kind of focused a lot on the injury prevention side of things, because for those performers, they're doing 8 shows a week, uh, every single week. So unlike some other professional sports, there's no real off season, and oftentimes like your day off is actually going to be a travel day, which can be even just, it's more taxing than it is actually a rest day. When we would get assigned to a show, the first thing that we would really do is something called like a risk analysis, where we would go into the rehearsal process and actually take a look at the choreography and make notes about what some of the repetitive movement patterns are, and kind of using that information to actually predict what types of overuse injuries were likely to happen.
Awesome.
And it was actually pretty cool to kind of see how different shows really would have certain types of injury trends. We would also look at, maybe root movements that aren't as repetitive, but maybe a little bit more of a higher risk type of movement. So happening less often, but if done incorrectly one time, it may lead to more of like a, kind of a traumatic type of injury.
Right.
So we could use that information and kind of design and develop these injury prevention programs to kind of combat it on the front end, because once an overuse to injury starts to happen, it's really hard to get ahead of it when you have to continue to do the activity that led to it in the first place.
Right, right.
Yeah. So
And I'm sure you see that your eye is now trained to recognize these repetitive movements even on the pickleball courts too, because you've just been so honed in on seeing it in these performing arts areas and platforms that now your eyes are just very, very keen and trained on those repetitive movements, which we do have a lot of in pickleball.
exactly. I call it like the pickleball choreography, and
I love that.
it's going to vary, but one of my favorite things to do is to actually just watch professional players play. But what I'm actually watching as a physical therapist is their movements.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite things to actually do is actually go on to like the PPA Instagram page and just kind of scroll through and see some of those action shots that they have of players and post. What I've seen is like a lot of different players, but being in a similar position. And when I see that position, I'm like, I know a lot of probably recreational players have a difficult time getting into that position, but we can see that it's something that's happening a lot because this picture is coming up repetitively. And if they're having difficulty getting into that position, there's likely some type of compensatory strategy that's happening for them, and we can kind of take a look at that in our sessions and really kind of break down the biomechanics that can help them.
Absolutely. And, we see a lot of these amazing feats that end up in the highlights on all of these pickleball current events, videos, and highlights, and everything like that. And like you said, yeah, there are these very, very clear pictures of these professional athletes, higher level pickleball players, that they're getting into these positions that are really hard for the recreational player. But these athletes are also doing themselves favors on and off the courts to make sure that they're able to get themselves into that position. What is something that in your Broadway national tour physical therapy risk analysis and treatment stuff that you guys would do, how would you help optimize your performers for recovery, knowing that they're performing day after day, 8 shows a week? And how can we transition that maybe into some of the mindset of what pickleballers can do with how often many pickleballers are playing in a given week?
Yeah. I think that with routine of 8 shows, it was kind of difficult to kind of control, how much is too much activity. Also kind of getting that sweet spot of like, okay, we're we're doing enough cross training to where you are getting benefit and trying to help maintain some symmetry in the body, but also making sure that we're not fatiguing your body on top of what you're already doing. So, in that 8-week schedule, I would say that we would come up with programs that really are doing a lot of exercises to help create more balance in their body. So like if there was a show that had a lot more like jumping, sliding, compressive type of stuff on the knees, maybe we do a little bit focus a lot more on that posterior strengthening program. So that way we're making sure that their muscles aren't getting so stiff that they're losing, they're starting to lose some of their mobility. But I typically would recommend, like just 2-3 times a week, just kind of a whole body type of movement training, and focusing on some good compound movements, but making sure that you are addressing the muscle groups that aren't getting utilized as much during the choreography.
Absolutely. So in pickleball choreography, what are a couple of those movements that you see a lot of that you figure more people could spend more attention on to reduce their chance of getting a lot of the injuries that we see in pickleball?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest movement patterns that I've seen is this movement where people get pulled out wide in the kitchen, in kind of some of these dinking rallies, and they have to open up their stance to kind of lunge to the side and kind of hinge down to be able to get to that low ball. I think that is a really difficult position for a lot of people to get into, because it requires good hip mobility on that lead hip.
Right.
We're also want to take a look at kind of what the tracking of the knee is, making sure it's not kind of collapsing inward. And then also, what does their trunk position look like? Are they able to get a good hinge? Do they have that strength in their posterior chain, or are they kind of flexing at the lumbar spine to be able to get into that? And then even on the trail leg too, that requires a lot of flexibility in some of those like inner thigh muscles too.
Yeah, absolutely. And most of us, have, regardless if we're, the majority of the population that plays pickleball in, maybe a couple times a week versus like the core pickleball players who are playing pretty often. Yeah, many of us are coming from a lifestyle of sitting, especially coming out of, the pandemic or just our everyday jobs. Many people are sitting a lot for their jobs. We're sitting for our traveling and all that. And that mobility and that motion that we need, paired with the stability of actually being able to like hold those positions in those dink rallies, makes a world of a difference, which is often why we see a lot of strains and sprains because people are not ready to be in that position or maintain that position. So I definitely agree with you there that that's a very common overlooked movement pattern that we need to be working into.
Yeah, and I think you just nailed it too when you were talking about like it's one thing like can you assume that position, but it's a whole different ball game to be able to move into that position and then also move out of it, because
Right.
pickleball is a very quick reaction sport too. So like that's such a key to it as well. It's like, okay, you've got the ability to get into it, but it's a whole different ball game to be able to move in and out of it.
Definitely. And especially with the side to side movement, those wide stances, that's not a motion that we find ourselves doing on a daily basis off the court already. Most of our walking we do forward. And if we have to go, in a different direction, we usually will turn around or, turn our body so that we're still walking forward. And so that's a quite an unfamiliar movement, even though many of us are, like, oh yeah, you like step to the side. Like on a conscious level, we don't realize how much effort that puts our body through in order to get into those and out of those positions, like you said.
Yeah, and then so I think that's like a movement that's repetitive, and then as you kind of talked about, just a lot of people are kind of going from maybe sitting at a computer or desk for an extended period of time. Well, maybe an area that's not as repetitive, but still maybe a little bit what I would consider like a higher risk opportunity for injury is going from not doing a whole lot of overhead stuff with our arms and shoulders, and then aggressively trying to go for that put away with the
Right.
overhead when we don't really have that motion.
Right, absolutely. And I've definitely seen a good share of people coming in with complaints of that. Like I tried to go for an overhead and I just like, I like really pinched down on my shoulder, or I aggravated my elbow or something like that. Cause yeah, it's like a really big, grand, powerful movement. And our body's just not used to being way up here, with most of our life being in a very, it's in front of my chest and kind of between shoulder and hip level type lifestyle. And so yeah, that makes a huge difference, when it comes to the considerations of moving out of these seated positions and into the big positions of pickleball for those high risk movements. I remember when Mary Brasha did her merry-go-round shot that like she like hit the ball from behind her
Oh
head, and
yeah.
then it like came, and she got it back over the net, and everybody was like, whoa, that was amazing. Because a lot of people were like, for one thing, just to be able to get your paddle behind your head and like make that shot, and save that shot for one thing. But I know a lot of the people who look at movement are a lot more are recognizing like she had to have some pretty good range of motion to be
Yeah.
able to get to that position. And many people don't realize that because she has that motion and she has that control. I mean, we don't know if her back or anything like that bothered her after that game, because we didn't really get any information on that. But in that sudden big, explosive movement that she had, that could also be an example of one of those high risk positions for somebody that's maybe a recreational player that hasn't been turning their body in that way in a long time.
Absolutely.
So
Somebody like that goes for that, type of shot, but doesn't have that mobility. That's
right,
a perfect, yeah, a perfect example of where
yeah,
you're good.
absolutely. And I know that there's like a lot of people don't realize that when we get injured, there's a lot of work that has to get put in to rehab and safely get back on the courts, right? There's pain, and you get over pain when you start getting things to heal and things are feeling better. But then there's those extra steps of actually building back and returning to sport, that we need to be moving into to make sure that we don't put ourselves at risk of encountering that pain again. And so what kind of stuff have you seen either on the courts or in the clinics, when it comes to helping to educate people and wrap their mind around, hey, just because the pain is gone doesn't mean it's never going to come back? How do you kind of talk to people and walk people through that mindset or shift?
Yeah, yeah. I think that probably best to kind of even just kind of use a specific example.
Please.
So let's use like maybe a common injury that we are seeing in pickleball, Achilles tendinopathy.
Yeah.
I think that in the early stages, we can reduce pain pretty quickly with,
Mhm.
with Achilles tendinopathy with a little bit of activity modification, some modalities, soft tissue work, and then I like to kind of even just do some isometric stuff too that just initially start that loading phase, but also have some analgesic effects too when done at a certain kind of set and rep scheme. So that's just kind of phase one. You can start to get rid of pain with Achilles tendinopathy, within 2-3 weeks, with the right modifications. When it comes to transitioning into pickleball, it's even different with an activity like running. You're
Yeah.
getting a lot of that springing load with running, but it's strictly in a forward type of motion.
Right.
So one thing that I really will emphasize with my clients is that, when it comes to Achilles tendinopathy and going back onto the pickleball court, is that we have to get that tendon to be able to tolerate loading in forward backward motion,
Yeah.
side to side,
Yeah.
diagonal. And if you haven't trained all of those planes, then that's a potential area that, okay, you haven't trained that tendon to be able to tolerate that load. And that's an area where, yeah, it could come back.
Yeah. Absolutely. And a lot of people, when they only really think of physical therapists when they're in pain, and as soon as the pain is gone, they're kind of like, okay, we're good, you're gonna go back. But what are some other roles that physical therapists can actually play in helping pickleball players?
Yeah, well, I think that recovery is a really big one. When you are talking about people that play daily or play like in these tournament days where your body is just wrecked from playing so many games. I think that physical therapists have a lot of tools, and that's, kind of one of the things that, kind of going back to our Broadway discussion is,
Mhm.
I would do a lot of manual therapy techniques, kind of help with the muscle recovery, help to clear out some of the metabolites and stuff like that, to
Mhm.
allow their bodies to bounce back more quickly. So I think that physical therapists um, can play a huge role in recovery,
Agreed.
and that's going to help with injury prevention. And then I think that we also are really, because we're movement experts, I think that we're injury prevention, I think also carries into performance enhancement.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that we can really help people to optimize their biomechanics, kind of as we talked about, like looking at what are the demands of the game and how can we help you to optimize your movement in those positions. We have such a bigger role, and this is even just, for every client out there, not
Mhm.
just pickleball players. We have so many services to offer in addition to just the rehabilitation side of things.
Absolutely. I agree. And it makes a huge difference for the people who actually do, start working with physical therapists past just the pain relief phase, just past that phase one or even phase zero, depending on who you talk to. Because if you're
Mhm.
injured, then you're just treading water at that point. I had a really good conversation just recently with another physical therapist that was saying, even high level athletes, these professional athletes, they have an athletic trainer or a physical therapist or somebody that's a movement specialist or is proficient in this performance aspect, that even when they're not hurt, they're still getting taken care of as soon as they step foot off of the courts, or off of the field, or the rink, wherever they might be. They're a core part of your performance team, of your wellness team when you're playing the sport. And many of us, whether we're recreational or competitive, or even just living our everyday lives, we're being active human beings. We should be treating our body with the same kind of expectation of, we're going to make sure that you're still working functionally and working optimally, and just feeling free and confident to try whatever you want to, without feeling like, oh, I'm going to get hurt from, just trying this one activity.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a great point because you are starting to see a lot more like articles coming out about pickleball injuries and like
There was
how,
one that just came out yesterday, even talking about pickleball injuries on the rise.
yeah,
It was on Fortune Well, and the whole article is basically just talking about how millions of Americans, tens of millions of Americans playing pickleball, and they're estimating that, like, there's going to be, what was the number? It's like almost $400 million of pickleball related injury costs in the medical world, which is a lot. There's thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people checking into the emergency department or urgent care, or getting checked for outpatient, or getting surgeries or other types of procedures because of pickleball related injuries.
yeah. So I think that we can provide, to your point, like a peace of mind. We don't want to deter people from playing. There's so many people that love it. There's the social aspect
Right.
of the game, and it brings so many people so much joy. Let's ease that peace of mind for people, and let's take a look and see how well you're moving. And so yeah, go see a physical therapist and see if you can get some good direction on what you can do to be confident when you're on the court that you're not going to get hurt.
Absolutely, because everybody moves differently. Even though a lot of us go through some basic movements that are kind of similar, whether it's sitting or getting out of bed or walking, a lot of us have many different backgrounds. There are people who have had, motor vehicle accidents, or have had other sort of, freak injuries or past surgeries. Some people respond really well to operations, and some people respond not well at all. And that changes how everybody's body moves on an individual case by case basis, that it's really hard to generalize or standardize necessarily what everybody in the pickleball world needs. And so with that in mind, knowing that we can't fully generalize, are there a couple of things, like maybe one or two things, that you wish you saw more pickleball players doing that would help them reduce their risk of injury?
Yeah, I think the first one that actually kind of comes to mind is something that we often kind of think of actually from a performance side of things is actually like incorporating some type of agility into your
Right.
training.
Yeah.
Yeah, we often look at that as a means to kind of just, yeah, optimize your performance. But yet, because I think so many people don't really do any of that agility work, that side to side, forward, backward type of stuff.
Mhm.
If your only exposure to that movement is when you go play pickleball, when you're actually not even focusing on what that quality of movement is, you're focusing on shot execution. I think that's an area that actually puts you at kind of increased risk.
Mhm.
So I definitely would say starting you incorporating some agility type of stuff, and you can use a physical therapist and a trainer to kind of help you establish what level you're currently at, what you can kind of tolerate. But I
Mhm.
think even just starting with low level agility stuff will give people a lot of benefit.
Agreed. And, I think everybody acknowledges when somebody has done agility. Like on even if we don't like recognize like, oh, that's like a really agile person, we recognize the prowess that they have through their performance. Like Annalie Waters, for example, she can traverse that court with such purposefulness and intentional movement, and she gets places in, ways that a lot of people can't even fathom. And I think a lot of that comes from her background as a soccer player and
Mhm.
having the footwork agility that has been trained in that she's now incorporating on the court. So, everybody recognizes how well Annalie Waters plays, but everybody else is capable of improving their performance, like you said, just by incorporating a little bit more agility into their drills and their routines off the court.
Yeah, yeah. So just like something low level, it's just like working on a little bit of a side shuffle, kind of work, keep low, stay low, and just kind of work on some side to side movements. I think that that's something that would benefit a lot of people and helping with, things like ankle sprains and being getting more accustomed and confident with those change of directions.
Absolutely, absolutely. What else? What other things that you could see helping reduce risk of injury for a lot of people?
Yeah, and I think that when it comes to injury preventions, like we got to know what are we trying to prevent. So I think we can look at the research now as it is coming out and telling
Yes.
us what injuries are out there. And two of the common ones that I'm seeing are pickleball elbow
Hmm.
and Achilles tendinopathy. So
Hmm.
let's say that we want to kind of address and prevent pickleball elbow. I think one of the biggest things that I see in my clients um, is some weakness in their more proximal muscles.
Yeah.
So kind of focusing a little bit more or adding some scapular stabilization or some good like rotator cuff exercises
Mhm.
into your warm up or into your some of your workouts. It can be they don't have to be your primary exercises in your workouts, but I think those smaller muscle groups can be incorporated in as like what I call fillers.
Yeah.
So if you're doing like squats or lunges, give your legs a break, but on that rest period, maybe add in some of like your shoulder band exercises or some scapular stabilizer exercises. So you're
Yeah.
being efficient with that time.
Agreed, agreed. I like your use of the word fillers. I've heard some people also use the terminology of like snacking on them. I'll use that a lot
Mm,
with my clients too. It's like, yeah, just snack on a couple of these movements just to like get them into your day. Because a lot of us like snacking, and with pickleball, we're constantly snacking between our games. But I fully agree. Like, give your legs a break and fill in with some of these shoulder stability, rotator cuff, scapular stabilizer type activities just to get more of that proximal strength to help prevent stuff like pickleball elbow. So we have that for like pickleball elbow. How about for Achilles tendinopathy?
yeah, I think that for Achilles tendinopathy, you can kind of go a couple different directions, but I think optimizing your ankle mobility, making sure that you have that, it's going to help with, change of directions, especially when you're transitioning kind of from that backward position into kind of running back forward. Single leg work, working really on having good ankle stability and kind of connecting that up the entire kinetic chain. And that's what I love about the lower extremity. I find that if you do some single leg stuff, you're going to get so many benefits from the hip, the knee, the ankle. Um, yeah, kind of addressing that entire kinetic chain.
Absolutely. And our leg muscles are super powerful muscle groups. I mean, there's a reason why they take up so much of, most of our body. And a lot of times I find, kind of going back to pickleball elbow, a lot of reasons why we see any sort of upper extremity issues is because people are overcompensating and trying to produce a lot of power from their arms when they could be using their legs to help them a lot more. So,
Hmm.
even if you're dealing with something in your upper body, check your leg strength and power as well. And that can really help you out number one in your performance, but then also again reducing that risk of injury. The whole body is a linked system, and I think many people forget that when we're like, oh yeah, I have ankle pain or I have elbow pain. We forget that there's other connective tissues that connect to the connective tissues to that spot.
Yeah, well, I think going back to like where we were talking about people being able to kind of get into open stance shot where they're really lunging outward. Well, if you can't do that with your legs, then you're going to really reach with your arm to be able to generate enough force from that position. You have to kind of, manipulate your wrist to generate that.
Absolutely.
One thing I love too to kind of help people optimize that kinetic chain for pickleball players with being a rotation sport are like I love using medicine balls.
Yeah.
Very like low risk or but great way to work power and in order to kind of generate that, people naturally kind of generate a lot more force through their legs to be able to propel that ball.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so just kind of, reminding the body of the most efficient way to move. And when the body can move efficiently, then you know that you're way less at risk of injuries. And more than anything, we just want to be limiting those injuries from happening as much as we can, especially with this sport growing so very quickly and everybody bringing their friends and family out onto the courts.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It is fun to try and recruit whatever friend that's not currently playing. That's my primary goal, is to get them on the court now.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's everyone's prerogative. I've not met a single pickleball player that has not been at least invited there in the first place. Very rarely do I see people just like wandering out to check it out. It's usually like, oh yeah, like so and so brought me out here and stuff like
Yeah,
that. Because yeah, it's a very communal sport, and that's one of the reasons why we love the sport is because it's an opportunity to enjoy this act of playfulness in our movements and our athleticism, but then playfulness with our friends, because a lot of pickleballer players, we don't take ourselves too seriously. We have a lot of fun with everybody that we're out there on the court with, even when we're in a really, really serious match. And so, we want to do our best to get back out to the courts and enjoy that community, enjoy that connection with everybody, which is why I'm really, really excited that Brien and I and some other friends that we're making in the health and fitness world are trying to bring this information, bring these opportunities for people to really take care of their bodies and ease into the sport appropriately for their body so that they can enjoy the longevity of playing games for many years to come. So, Brien, for our listeners that are wanting to follow along with you more, there's so much knowledge that you've been able to share with us here and even more knowledge on your platforms. Where can people find you and keep up to date with what you're doing?
yeah, yeah. As you mentioned, I have a podcast called the Healthy Pickleballer podcast. So always trying to share some insight and kind of reaching a wider audience through that platform. And then under the same name, the Healthy Pickleballer, you can find me on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, where I just kind of show some exercises, movements, and just information that can help you to stay healthy and enjoy your time on the court. And then I also have a couple of free resources available at connectwithbrienlee.com. And that's Brien, Brien.
Love it. I'm so excited. Brien has so many amazing things on his platforms already. I really love seeing anything that comes across my timeline, across my feed. Whenever I'm on social media, he's tuning in and jumping into a bunch of challenges. He has a lot of really great activities that you can get started and try. So he's really killing that social media game and getting connected with a lot of other amazing trailblazers in the pickleball health and fitness world. So please go follow Brien, connect with him, reach out to him, because he's got a lot of other amazing things to offer to the world of pickleball. But thank you, Brien, so much for coming onto this podcast. I love having conversations with you. This is like a part 4 of all of our pickleball conversations that we've had from podcast to in person. So I really appreciate you taking some time out of your week to share your knowledge with even more pickleball players out there.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And likewise, I love the message that you are sharing with your listeners and on your platforms too. So I really appreciate you having me on.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Pickleball Physio listeners. We hope that you had some really, really good information that you got from here. If you have additional questions, reach out to me or reach out to Brien. We'd be happy to answer them. Because like we said, we want to give you guys that ease of mind to get back out there on the courts. Share this episode with a friend that you think might benefit from it, or save this for yourself if you need a little reminder down the road. Other than that, hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you guys out there on the courts. Bye.